What happens when the man you've been mocking turns out to be your boss? This team found out in the most humbling way. It was one of those mornings that didn't give away any signs of the chaos ahead. The sun was bright over downtown Dallas, and the streets buzzed with activity as people hustled through their day. Among them was a man named Elijah, a delivery driver who had seen it all. Elijah wasn't flashy or loud, but there was a quiet dignity about him that spoke volumes this particular morning. He had an important delivery to make, one that required him to head to one of the fanciest restaurants in the city, Bellandria's Fine Dining, known for its high-end clientele and pretentious reputation. It wasn't the type of place Elijah usually lingered in. But today duty called. His truck rumbled into the back alley of the restaurant, where deliveries were typically dropped off. The place had an air of exclusivity, even in the loading area. Large silver doors, marked staff only, stood tall, almost daring anyone who didn't belong to step through. Elijah grabbed the invoice clipboard, slid his gloves on, and carefully stacked the boxes of organic produce and specialty seafood onto his dolly. As he wheeled the load toward the entrance, he heard faint laughter from inside. It was the kind of laughter that made your chest tighten, a mixture of ridicule and superiority. Elijah shook his head lightly. He was no stranger to being underestimated or judged, but he wasn't about to let it rattle him. He knocked twice on the steel door and waited. When it opened, a young man in a crisp white chef's jacket stared at him like he was some kind of inconvenience behind him. Two other staff members peeked out, one stifling a chuckle and the other rolling her eyes. "Deliveries are supposed to come earlier." The young man snapped, his tone dripping with annoyance. Elijah calmly held up the invoice. "I'm right on schedule, sir. Fresh seafood from Gulf Coast imports and the organic greens you requested." The chef waved him off. "Whatever. Just bring it in and don't block the kitchen entrance." As Elijah pushed his dolly inside, he noticed more staff turning their heads to glance at him, their expressions ranging from amused to condescending. Someone muttered under their breath, "Guess the company sends just anyone to places like this." It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, that mocking, dismissive tone that said more than any insult could. Elijah kept moving, unloading the boxes carefully, his hands steady, even though their words lingered in the air like a bad smell. But Elijah didn't flinch. Not yet. He knew something they didn't. And it was only a matter of time before everything changed. As Elijah maneuvered the dolly deeper into the restaurant, he couldn't help but take in the surroundings. Bellandria's Fine Dining was as extravagant as the rumors. CL-fled crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow on marble floors so polished you could see your reflection. The open kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances, and very corner of the place screamed wealth. But beneath the pristine surface was something far less polished. Elijah noticed the way the staff moved, quick and efficient, yes, but with an air of self-importance that didn't sit right. These weren't people proud of their work. They were proud of their hierarchy, and right now Elijah was at the bottom of it. "Make sure you're not blocking the chef's station," barked a woman wearing a sharp black suit. She didn't even look up from her clipboard as she walked by. "Yes, ma'am," Elijah replied, his tone polite but firm. He didn't mind following instructions, but he could feel her gaze linger, scrutinizing him, as if she were searching for a reason to dismiss him. NTY nearby. Two waiters stood at the edge of the dining area, folding napkins and whispering. It didn't take a detective to figure out they were talking about him. Every now and then they'd glance his way, barely hiding their smirks. "What do you think, 5 minutes before he messes something up?" one of them said, snickering. Elijah ignored them and continued with his work. Years in this business had taught him that people like this weren't worth his energy. He focused on unloading the boxes neatly onto the counter by the walk-in fridge. Still, the comments kept coming. "You'd think someone delivering to a place like this would at least dress better." Another voice chimed in. Elijah glanced at his uniform. It was clean and pressed, practical for someone hauling boxes all day. But to these people, it wasn't good enough. It didn't matter. He wasn't here to impress anyone. As he finished the first load and turned to head back to the truck, he passed by a group of line cooks near the grill. They too paused their chatter to take a long look at him. One of them, a tall man with a smirk that practically screamed. Trouble leaned over and whispered loudly enough for Elijah to hear Betty couldn't even afford to eat here, let alone step through the front door. The others laughed, and Elijah felt his jaw tighten slightly. He had plenty of practice letting things slide, but this was starting to push the limit. Still, he kept his composure and made his way back outside for the next load. But the worst was yet to come inside. The mocking laughter grew louder, and Elijah could feel their eyes on him like he was some sort of spectacle. Elijah returned to his truck, loading the second set of boxes onto his dolly. The morning heat was creeping in, and the sweat on his brow mixed with the dust from the alley. But as he pushed the dolly back toward the kitchen doors, he could still hear the faint laughter echoing from inside. They hadn't even tried to lower their voices when he re-entered the kitchen. The head chef, a sharp-featured man named Damien, stood by the counter inspecting the ingredients Elijah had already delivered. He turned his nose up slightly as he picked up a crate of seafood. "Is this the best they could send?" Damon muttered just loud enough for Elijah to hear. Elijah paused for a moment. "If there's an issue with the quality, I can call the supplier," and Damon cut him off with a dismissive wave. No, just drop it off and leave. We've got more important things to focus on." As Elijah began unloading the second batch of boxes, he couldn't help but notice the way Damien carried himself. The chef spoke loudly, directing his staff with an exaggerated authority, as if he needed everyone in the room to know he was in charge. "I swear," Damon said, turning to one of the servers. "The standards are dropping everywhere. Look at this guy. Do they not teach professionalism to delivery drivers anymore?" The server, a young woman with a forced smile, glanced at Elijah, but didn't say anything. Instead, she nodded at Damien and busied herself setting up the nearby dining area. Elijah kept his head down and finished unloading. He wasn't about to let their words get to him, but he couldn't ignore the growing irritation. It wasn't just the comments. It was the blatant lack of respect, the assumption that he was less than simply because of his job, as he moved to stack the empty crates. One of the kitchen staff called out to him, "Hey, delivery guy, you missed a box." Elijah turned, confused because he was certain he hadn't. The staff member pointed to a crate sitting near the door, working as he did. Elijah walked over and bent down to pick it up, only to realize it was empty. Another round of laughter rippled through the kitchen. "Just messing with you, man," the guy said, slapping his knee. "Relax a little." Elijah didn't respond. Instead, he placed the empty crate, CK down, and finished his work without another word. Inside, his patience was wearing thin. But he reminded himself of why he was here. He had a job to do and a point to make, even if they didn't know it yet. When the delivery was finally complete, Elijah handed the signed invoice to Damien. The chef didn't even look at him as he scrolled his signature across the paper. "You can go now," Damon said curtly, not bothering with a thank you. Elijah paused for a moment, his eyes steady. "Have a good day," he said evenly, before turning and heading back to his truck. But just as he reached the door, one of the waiters muttered under his breath, "Yeah, go back to wherever you came from." That was it. Elijah stopped in his tracks, his hand resting on the door handle for a brief moment. The room fell silent. All eyes were on him. Elijah turned slowly, his gaze meeting the waiter's. There was no anger in his expression, just a calm confidence that immediately silenced the smirks and whispers, "I came here." Elijah said, his voice steady to deliver something. "You clearly need more of respect." The room stayed quiet as Elijah walked out. But the real surprise was still waiting, and it was only a matter of time before they realized who he really was. Elijah leaned against the side of his truck, taking a moment to catch his breath. The delivery was done, but the weight of the morning lingered. He'd been in similar situations countless times, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the way they all seemed so comfortable in their assumptions, so blind to the possibility that he was more than what they saw. He glanced at the restaurant's grand facade, the name Bel Andreas, etched in elegant gold letters above the entrance. It was surreal, really. Just a few weeks ago, he had signed the final papers that made him the owner of this place. A bold step in his growing empire of fine dining establishments. But Elijah's journey to this moment wasn't one of privilege or shortcuts. It was built on years of sweat, sacrifice, and a relentless drive to prove himself. He grew up in a small town in Louisiana where opportunities were scarce, and expectations for someone like him were even scarcer. His parents worked tirelessly instilling in him the value of hard work and integrity. Elijah had started as a dishwasher in a local diner when he was just 16. Back then he'd watched the cooks and servers with fascination, dreaming of the day he could create something bigger, something extraordinary. Over the years he climbed the ladder, moving from kitchen staff to manager, and eventually he saved enough to open his first restaurant. It wasn't flashy, but it was his, and from there his vision only grew when the opportunity to buy Bel Andreas came up. Elijah didn't hesitate. He knew it was a risk, but he also knew what this place could become under his leadership. The restaurant had a reputation for exclusivity, but Elijah saw potential beyond the surface. He wanted to turn it into something more, an establishment where everyone felt valued, from the guests to the staff to the people making deliveries. But the transition wasn't going to be easy. Elijah had chosen not to announce his ownership immediately, opting instead to observe the culture firsthand. He wanted to see how the staff operated when they thought no one was watching. What he saw this morning only confirmed what he suspected: change was long overdue. Elijah climbed back into his truck and made a few notes on his tablet, preparing for the meeting he had scheduled with the staff later that afternoon. He'd kept the announcement of his arrival vague, telling the manager to gather everyone in the dining room at 3:00 p.m. He thought about the chef Damon and the way he carried himself, how quick he was to judge and dismiss. He thought about the waiters, the kitchen staff, and the manager who barely acknowledged him. Elijah didn't feel anger toward them. He felt something deeper, a sense of disappointment in how easily people fell into patterns of prejudice and disrespect. By the time he drove away from the restaurant, Elijah had made up his mind. The meeting wouldn't just be about introduction. It would be about setting the tone for what Bel Andreas would stand for. Moving forward, respect, humility, and equality weren't just buzzwords to him. They were the foundation of everything he believed in. And in a few short hours, they were about to find out exactly who Elijah was and why he was there. The clock struck 3:00 p.m., and the staff began to gather in the main dining room of Bel Andreas Fine Dining. Ohm looked curious, others annoyed. Damien leaned against a table. Arms crossed his expression, a mixture of irritation and boredom. "What's this about?" he muttered to one of the servers. "We're slammed tonight? And now we have to sit through a meeting." The restaurant manager, a middle-aged man named Greg, stood near the entrance, looking unusually nervous. He had been told to assemble everyone, but even he didn't know exactly why. All he had been told was that the new owner would be arriving today, and this meeting was mandatory. As the staff settled in, the doors to the dining room opened, and in walked Elijah, still dressed in the same uniform he'd worn that morning. For a moment the room was silent, the staff exchanging confused glances. Damien let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Elijah walked to the center of the room, his calm demeanor unchanged. He could feel the tension, the UN-spoken questions hanging in the air, but he didn't rush to explain. Instead, he let the silence linger for a few moments, meeting their gazes one by one. Finally, Greg cleared his throat, breaking the awkward quiet. Elijah, what are you doing here? This meeting is for staff only." Elijah smiled faintly, his voice steady but firm. "I know, Greg. That's why I'm here." Damon rolled his eyes. "Look, if this is about the delivery earlier, can we just move on? We have actual work to do." Elijah turned his attention to Damien, his gaze steady. "You're right, Chef Damon. This is about the deliv. Eerie, and it's about a lot more than that." Damon raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, Elijah continued, "Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Elijah Reynolds, and as of 3 weeks ago, I'm the new owner of Bel Andreas Fine Dining." The room fell silent again, but this time the air was thick with shock. Damon's smirk vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. The servers exchanged stunned looks, and Greg's face turned pale. "You," Damon finally managed to say, his voice almost a whisper. You're the owner. That's right, Elijah said, his tone even. And before you say anything else, I want you to understand something. This isn't about me flaunting my title or putting anyone in their place. This is about respect. He paused, letting his words sink in. I spent the morning observing how this team operates. I saw the way you treated me because you assumed I was just a delivery driver, and I want you to think about what that says. Not about me, but about you. Damon opened his mouth to respond, but quickly shut it again. The servers looked down at the floor, suddenly finding their shoes fascinating. Elijah continued, his voice carrying a quiet strength. You judged me before you even knew who I was. You made assumptions based on how I looked, what I was wearing, and the job I was doing. And that behavior, it doesn't just hurt me. It hurts this restaurant. It hurts the culture we're trying to build here. The room stayed silent as Elijah's words hung in the air. He looked around, meeting their eyes again. Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect, whether they're a guest, a staff member, or someone delivering the ingredients that keep this place running. That's the standard I expect from every single one of you. For the first time that day, Elijah saw something new in their expression. Shame, and as uncomfortable as it was for them, it was exactly what they needed to feel. The silence in the room was almost palpable. Every staff member grappling with the weight of Elijah's words. Damon shifted uncomfortably. His arms no longer crossed in defiance, but hanging awkwardly by his sides. The servers avoided eye contact or earlier smirks. Now long gone, Elijah took a step forward, his tone softening, but losing none of its authority. I know change doesn't happen overnight, but if this restaurant is going to succeed, it starts with how we treat each other. It starts with accountability and respect for everyone. He paused, scanning the room to make sure his message landed. I didn't start at the top. He said, I've been where you are. Working long hours doing the jobs no one notices. I've scrubbed floors, washed dishes, carried boxes, just like I did this morning. And let me tell you, those roles are just as important as any chef or manager in this room. Without them, this place doesn't run. The staff remained silent, the gravity of his journey hitting them harder than any reprimand could. Elijah let the moment settle before continuing. So here's what's going to happen starting today. We're building a new culture here. One where every role is respected, where assumptions and judgments have no place. And if anyone thinks they can't be part of that, this isn't the right team for you. His words were met with quiet nods, some staff members murmuring apologies under their breath. Damon finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. Elijah held up a hand to stop him. Actions speak louder than words. Chef, if you're willing to do better, then prove it. Show me and the rest of the team that you're here to grow. That goes for everyone. He stepped back, his calm demeanor returning. We all have biases, we all make mistakes, but what matters is how we move forward, and I believe this team can be better with that. Elijah turned to leave the room, but not before offering one final statement. Remember, respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost you everything. The staff sat in silence long after Elijah walked out, the weight of his message pressing down on them, and for the first time in years, Bellandria's fine dining felt like it might finally live up to its name. This story isn't just about a restaurant, it's about all of us. How often do we make assumptions about someone without knowing their story? How often do we let pride or prejudice cloud our judgment? Let's do better, whether it's in our workplaces, our communities, or even in our daily interactions. Respect and kindness don't just change lives, they build bridges.